KT Tunstall, the musician, the artist, incredible stuff. Black Horse and the Cherry Tree, Suddenly I See, Feel It All, Heel Over. KT Tunstall, my partner, my better half, more incredible. And we got to have this experience where we spent the last days of my dad's life together, and it was very impactful. So we thought we'd have a conversation about it. Here it is. Enjoy. Oh, I got a foot going. Can you believe we have a dog?
Can you believe we have 2 dogs and a baby giraffe
So we just got a new puppy.
who I haven't even met yet?
I know. Why don't you tell people about the relevance of dogs in our lives?
Oh my God. So we wouldn't be together if it wasn't for our dogs. Our dogs basically contrived to get us together. So we met in a dog park at the beginning of 2021 or spring of 21. And my little PTSD Minpin Mini doesn't basically talk to other people or play with other dogs, but just that one day decided to play with Nova. And I was like, oh my God, my dog's playing with another dog. And then I looked up, I was like, is that your dog?
That was it.
But the strangest part of the story is that we met each other within like a 3-mile radius of where we'd lived as babies back in the late 70s, which is
That was crazy.
Yeah.
The odds were insane.
Magnets in the ground.
Magnets
To get us
in the
together.
cosmos.
That's right. And one thing pertaining to what we're about to talk about, which is very interesting, is getting together older. Because I think both of us have come into the relationship extremely aware of our limited time together. We don't, we ain't gonna have no 50-year anniversary bash. We'll probably both, if we're still around, we'll definitely be in a chair.
But it's funny, we both adopted during the pandemic like every other person. And I was just saying to you yesterday, if you were a dog and you didn't get adopted during the pandemic, you're just an asshole dog.
Exactly. But yeah, we have a new baby. We've gone for the fantasy dog, and we have got an Irish wolfhound, which is going to be probably bigger than me.
It's going to get interesting.
But one of the reasons why we would go for it and get a dog like that is one thing I've always said to you since we first got together is we're going to die.
We're going to die. And the dogs are going to die. Everything's going to die. That was one of the questions, right? Is like, do you get a bigger dog because they're going to not last as long? You can't live your life like that.
No, you
got to
can't.
just enjoy it.
You've got to run towards love.
Yeah. And you know what I was actually thinking is that our first dogs are probably going to outlive our new dog.
I know. I thought that too.
There's a chance.
But you said a beautiful thing the other day where you were like, I genuinely think dogs are angels and they're just sent to teach us about limited time and mortality and love, and that you just have to give yourself over to loving something that you know you're going to lose sooner than you want to.
Yeah, I mean, so the whole topic of this conversation in the series that I'm doing is about death. And it's basically came about because my father passed away a few weeks ago, and you and I were able to have a very special last few days with him. We spent time with him in the hospital. And then as he was taken back to the house to kind of, for the last few days, and it was a very special experience.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. I'd never been by someone's side while they're leaving. Just to share with people watching, Chris's dad was just, as you call him, master jester. Spent his whole life making people laugh and making them smile and choosing mischief and fun at every possible turn. In the very final moments of his passing, and especially because we had never been with someone who'd passed before, you don't really know what you're looking for. Someone's been in a kind of chronically physically bad state for a long time. He was in hospital for, a week, and you know that he's on his way to passing, but you don't know when it's going to happen. It was lovely having our 2 dogs there, and Minnie is about 9 pounds, and as it turned out, stepped on his balls right before he died and made us laugh. And then the most amazing moment was that the heart rate speeds up as they're passing and the breath gets shorter. And the nurse said, that's it. That was his final breath. And so we all start crying and allow ourselves to accept it. And Tom suddenly goes, and fucking takes another one.
Yeah.
And then that was his last breath. And we were literally, oh, me, you, your mum, your sister, we were laughing out loud as he passed. And there couldn't have been a better energy around him for
Yeah,
when he
it
died.
was so on brand, and it
It
was
was so rad.
it was so cathartic. And
Yeah.
you know, I'm so glad it happened like that, because it was so fitting for him. Like you said, you just don't know what to expect, and you don't know
No.
when to expect it. There was a few times when you would come outside and get me and kind of bring me back in and tell me
Yeah.
that
Saying
things
you
are
should
starting
come
to
in.
sort of escalate. And then it wouldn't happen. And it was just this process of you kind of go back and forth between all these emotions. It just, you
Yeah.
have to go through that, right? That's
Yeah.
part
You've
part.
got to sit deep in it and exist deep in it as it's happening moment to moment. And I've been thinking a lot recently about time and about how there 100% is time travel at play all the time in our lives, because a great day can go by in a flash. And then when you're waiting for your bags at baggage claim, it feels like hours. Like time is really just our experience of it, right? It's not like this sort of empirical thing. It's like and those moments just seem to sort of last. They seem suspended. You're still and you're there, and you're not watching the clock. You're just being. What it left me with was this absolute wonder and fascination at the moment that life decides to leave. You know, it wasn't a car crash, it wasn't a heart attack. It's actually the energy of life saying, we're done. We're going to leave now. That was really fucking heavy, and also this amazing, such an honor to witness that. And I'll never ever forget that.
It was very special, and I know that it brought us closer together through that process, and also my family. Like we've talked about, my family and I have had moments where we haven't been very close, and these sorts of moments really do galvanize things a little bit and bring things together. So it was a blessing in so many ways. But I want to I want to go back with you a little bit. We can talk about that, more, but I want to go back with you because you've had other experiences. And specifically, well, let's start with the first one that I know about. Your first boyfriend?
First, sort of, yeah, one of my first proper boyfriends where I was, it was, we were going steady.
So take us back. You lost your first boyfriend. It was it's a very interesting, and
Yeah.
take us back to that
So,
experience.
so we were dating when I was around 14 in high school. Absolutely lovely guy, great, popular, really good looking. Sorry, but very, very kind-hearted person. His name was Greg, and we were together probably for a year or two or so. Which, talking about time, was just like a lifetime when you're a teenager. It was such a long relationship. And then we finished high school. We were still kind of friends. I went off to university at 18. And you have Freshers Week when you're at college, where you're kind of getting to know everybody, and they're having events where you're sort of meeting other people, and you're basically meant to be getting drunk and having a great time. And I get this message. I can't remember who it came through, but someone got in touch and said, "Can you let us know if Greg has been or does get in touch with you, because he's gone missing?" I hadn't been in touch with him that much over the previous couple of years, but because I was in London, I guess the family were just trying anything. And he had a beautiful girlfriend at the time. And anyway, it transpired that he'd committed suicide, and he jumped off a road bridge.
Mm.
which was a totally brutal way. I mean, as suicides go, it's not it's not as traumatic for other people, I think, than other ways, like jumping in front of a train or hanging yourself in a family home or something like that. His body was discovered like sometime later. He didn't leave a note, as far as I remember, but he tried to get into the police force and had failed, and I think just had a very difficult relationship with his father and didn't feel very worthy. And I ended up going over and reading a lot of his letters to me from when we'd been together that I kept, and you could really, really hear it. A real crushing lack of self-esteem and a lot of self-deprecation. And I really struggled with it. And I went home. So that first week of college where I'm meant to be, excuse me, having fun, I ended up going home for his funeral. And it was a very odd experience of a first funeral of someone I was very close to, because it was just me and all my mates. It was a bunch of 18-year-olds going, how the fuck do we handle this? Like, what? And I was really angry. I think all of us felt very pissed off with him that he hadn't reached out and talked to anyone. And then of course you're going, but he was not in a right mind. So you can't judge his decisions, you know? And then a month after the funeral, I'd gone back to college. I had this incredible dream of being in this sort of David Lynchian red velvet room, going up a black iron staircase, spiral staircase. And the room was full of small groups of people sitting on like little red velvet ottomans, everybody looking very bright and present and beautiful and talking to each other. And I'm sitting there on my own, and Greg comes over. We're all dressed in black in this red room. And I'm talking to Greg. And I said, wait a minute, this is really weird. You're dead. Like, how are we talking? And he said, don't worry about it. Just try and forget about that. Let's just catch up. How are you? And we'd keep talking. And that was it. And I realized all these other people were visiting dead loved ones and having this space where they could go and see them. And anyway, I woke up the next day completely altered, feeling totally at peace, feeling like he was in a good place, all was well. And I wrote a song. It was my first song about death, which was called Girl and the Ghost.
Wow. Do you think that was a spiritual experience, or do you think that was your brain helping you cope with that situation?
Uh, my answer to that is tied up with my experience of psilocybin, because I feel like early engagement with magic mushrooms when I was probably around 17 or 18 really fundamentally changed my relationship with my idea of death, made me feel much more curious and almost excited about what's the other side of life. It's certainly, I'm not a dogmatically religious person. I don't follow any kind of specific religion, but I certainly have a sense of awe and enjoy a sense of worship, really about nature. But I suppose also I definitely subscribe to the idea of mystery and to not being able to comprehend what is there on the other side of life when we pass. And so I don't believe it's darkness and nothing. I think that we're return. My dad was a physicist, and so he always would say, you know, we come from stardust. We go back to this incredible cosmic soup. Nothing is new. Everything is drawn from the cosmic world around us and goes back to it. So that in itself, from a scientific point of view, is actually a very hopeful and optimistic and kind of exciting prospect, I think, as an energetic being in the world.
I find suicide so difficult in so many ways because you never know what people are going through, and
Yeah,
they're oftentimes not giving you any sort of inclination that they're going to do what they're going to do.
no.
And at the same time, we're left to kind of wonder what we could have done to help that person. So did you have any feelings of thinking that you could have done more to maybe chime in and help that
Yeah.
person out?
Yeah, particularly when I went back and read those letters. I was like,
Yeah.
damn, he was in pain. I could I could hear all the pain.
Yeah.
Um
So how do we, I mean, that just, leads me to think that we need to be asking people more often how they're doing, like on a deeper level than just superficial, how you doing walking down the street. We need to actually be inquiring to people where they're at, and maybe
Yeah.
dig a little bit to the point where we get a better sense of how they're doing, to really understand where people are at.
I mean, I've certainly found as I've got older that especially with what I do, I meet an inordinate amount of people every day. I meet way more people than a person is meant to meet in a lifetime. Just every day, new people, new people I'm working with, new people I'm playing with. Just it's mental. And so I think what I've learned is to really try and carve very carefully and curate where my energy goes in my life, so that those people I really genuinely love and who look out for and love me, we can look after each other better. We have more time and more space and more energy to actually put into those deeper, more meaningful relationships that you really are going to want around you when you're older. It's gardening, right? It's like gardening. It's like, don't tend every single plant in the garden. You've got to choose what you're going to look after for it to get strong. And that's been really great for my own mental health, and I think that's been really good for my friends' mental health, to know that I'm there for them and really nurturing and feeding those relationships and not forgetting about them.
Absolutely. Now, you lost your dad too, who I've heard many stories about,
Yeah.
and just sounds like he was an amazing guy. What year was it when you lost him?
2012.
2012. And so where were you at in your life at that point? I know that created a huge tectonic shift for you. But yeah, take us back to 2012 and when that all happened.
So my dad, the same week that Greg went missing, the same week my dad was going into hospital with his first serious cancer diagnosis. He managed to get through that one. My dad had not, at least sort of 19 times he should have died when he didn't. He like got electrocuted really badly in his lab, where he's like, fitting, and someone comes in and like threw a rug on him. Like he just like would be on his bike and cycle into a car, and he went mountain climbing, and he was a major risk taker, my dad. But actually quite a lot of physicists in his department ended up getting uh, quite aggressive cancers.
Sure.
And they think probably because a lot of them were ignoring radiation protocol around. My dad was in nuclear magnetic resonance, so there was quite a lot of risk involved in what he was doing. But in the end, he got Parkinson's, and we didn't know how far gone it had gone, because he'd had all this throat cancer stuff that ended up giving him the same symptoms as the Parkinson's: the swallow problem, the shuffling, the head and the shaking. So we didn't know he had Parkinson's until quite late on. But he still would have, we thought, had probably 10 years left, albeit not fantastic quality of life. But he refused to stop riding his bicycle. And he fell in a massive hole in a construction site, which actually wasn't his fault. It was because the stuff around the hole wasn't secured properly, and he leant on it, and he fell on his head, broke his neck, couldn't swallow anymore, ended up on a feeding tube, just, nightmare.
Whoa.
And I was on tour. I was in the middle of making an album at the time. I'd gone to make the first half of it in Tucson, Arizona. It was called Invisible Empire Crescent Moon. And then I'd taken the summer off because it was too fucking hot in Tucson to stay there for the summer. So I'd come home and I was doing some festival gigs. And I got the phone call actually the morning of a festival show when I was on the bus in the middle of a field. And thankfully, actually quite close to home, and with my little brother Dan at the time.
What was that phone call like? Do you remember your initial feeling of?
Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday.
What did you feel?
It's so clear. He was in hospital because I think he'd got pneumonia, and his swallow was so bad. They were trying to help him out, and he wasn't getting enough nutrients in. And my tour manager woke me up, Rebecca woke me up at about 7 in the morning. So I knew that would never happen. So I knew something was wrong. And then I got my mum on the phone. My mum is not a crier. I've probably seen my mum cry like 2 or 3 times in my whole life. And, you know, she was just cracking up on the phone. And I was like, Dad's died.
Yeah.
And I remember this feeling of weird physical elevation, which I guess is probably adrenaline, maybe, or cortisol or something. But I went immediately into, is mum all right?
Hmm.
You know, are you okay? What's happening? Where's Dan? I've got to tell Dan. I didn't kind of burst out crying or anything. I was definitely very emotional, but I went into response mode. And then I had to tell my brother, and that was very hard. And so we were in a very beautiful place. We were in a field in the sunshine at festival with a beautiful view of the area where Dad lived, and we just had a big hug, and then we cried it out, and then we, you know, cancelled all my upcoming shows and got ourselves back home. And yeah, there's just, you can, even if you know that your parent is ill, it's so fucking weird that someone doesn't exist anymore.
I
It's
know.
so strange.
I actually just thought about that for the first time yesterday. Actually, the thought hit me for the first time that I'm never going to see my father again.
Yeah, how did you feel? How,
I just it sort of just settled in on its own. It was just the thought came out of the blue, and I was like, "Wow, that's very permanent."
yeah,
And it didn't make me sad or anything, but it
it
sort of
just
just came
doesn't
at its
really
own
make sense, does it? It's like,
time.
and
Yeah.
my dad's passing was like Tom, your dad. It was a very profound experience that I'm very grateful for. So when my dad passed, it was like an enormous spiritual gift.
Mm.
First of all, I was telling you, I had this very strange experience when I went to see his body in the funeral home. It was about 10 days after he died. So, you know, it wasn't particularly pretty, but we talked about this amazing marble like statue look that a body gets once the blood has stopped running through it. And it's just all the wrinkles go. They almost look like they've got baby skin. But I had this really weird, overwhelming feeling that I'd been a soldier with my dad in a war. And I can't explain it. I'm not someone who has experiences like that ever. And I just
So
had
you
this
thought in a
picture.
past life you were a soldier with your
Yeah,
dad?
I felt like me and dad had like fought together as guys of the
Wow.
same age. It was, and I don't know. So what I was going to also say about psilocybin is I think the experience of mushrooms, that spiritual journey, gives us a visual idea of something, but it's a representation of something that we can't really understand unless we see it. You know, we're shown a version of it in a way that we understand. And I feel like that dream I had about Greg and this vision that I had about Dad was somehow just a vision that I could understand as a human being with a brain and a meat suit, that there's something bigger, there's something more, and there's something mysterious that we don't quite understand about our existence and where we go, and that energy coming and going and flowing through bodies and leaving bodies. And so yeah, I think that's what the dream was, and I think that's what the vision was with Dad. And yes, I think it's extremely spiritual.
Yeah, it's something we don't understand, and it's also something we just don't talk about, right? We just
No, we
don't
don't.
we don't even conversate about it. It's like this avoidance of talking about this subject, I think, has so many sort of peripheral side effects to it that
Yeah,
I mean it's a really deep ocean to get into, but I guess psilocybin mushrooms could almost be looked at like as a ritualistic sort of way to
yeah.
understand these things better.
Well, I
Do you
think it's a way of tackling the fear, and it's
Yeah.
the fear that stops us talking about it. So if we can remove the fear around the subject, we can potentially actually get excited about the subject.
Yeah.
And you know, you and I, thank God, have both had pretty positive experiences of our father's passing. We're very lucky in that respect. But you know, when my dad passed, I stopped drinking completely for 6 years and got divorced within like 3 days. I woke up. I woke up. It was just the most shocking. It was like Keanu Reeves in the fucking Matrix. I was like, oh my God, I'm doing this wrong. I'm living this life wrong and I don't have time.
Yeah. So what were you thinking there? Why such like huge changes in your life? What was, where were you at before that? And then what sort of just hit you on the head and made you change everything?
Well, I think part of it was my dad's presence in the world was I was trying to please him.
Right.
So I knew that he liked the idea of me getting married. I knew he liked the idea of me being secure, having a house, having a car, having success. I think my dad probably would have loved for me to have kids, and I never wanted them. So there was always that in my head that, oh, it's a shame that I wasn't able to give him grandchildren. But there was this, my dad was very logical, and I was brought up in a very academic way. So there was this action of ticking boxes to achieve. He was very, very achievement based as a parent. And I realized I had done all of that. I saw his body lying in the funeral home, and I was like, I'm fucking miserable. I've done all the things that I thought I wanted. I've been in charge of it. No one's been telling me what to do. And I screwed it up. I'm really miserable. I'm not enjoying my life. When you see a loved one on a table and they've had their time, and I know there's stuff my dad probably would have liked to have done. I don't think he was entirely happy. He hadn't really done a lot of self work on himself. His generation, it wasn't particularly available to them, I don't think.
Yeah.
Or encouraged for sure. And I just knew I can't be lying on that slab cold, not having done it right when I know it wasn't right. I've got to change it. And so, I really felt faced with this choice in the face of my dad's death. You can either band-aid it and pretend everything's the same and just patch over cracks, or you can blow it up and completely start again. And I knew I couldn't pretend. I had to just rip it up completely. And I ripped it up completely. I blew my life up.
And how did that work out for you?
Awesome, baby.
Yeah. Did it feel like the universe rewarded that from you?
I don't feel rewarded. I felt like I was able to get back to actually communing with the universe, and I had stopped listening to it, and I'd closed, and I was being sensible, and I was being logical, and I just don't think that's how, for me, I should live. I need to live intuitively, and I need to live in communion with spirit and with passion and with love. And every time I follow something that isn't that, I go down a wrong road.
Yeah, we do have these inbuilt navigational systems, don't we?
Yes.
That when we numb them, we get in trouble for
Yes.
sure. And when we tap into them, things seem to be a lot better.
Yes. And I think that death is an extremely helpful tool to get us back on track.
Yeah. So, I mean, how can we start talking about this? One of the questions I was thinking the other day was when would you think we would start introducing this concept to, say, children? Would you talk to a child about death, and how would you explain it?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of kids probably have their first experience of death with a pet, probably.
Yeah.
A pet or a grandparent. Huh?
The old goldfish down the toilet.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of
Gone
thing,
to
right?
it's gone to the bunny farm. I think it's a very interesting conversation to start having with children for sure. But I think what we've talked about, like with you doing these really interesting chats with people, is asking people what they would like when they die. What do you want? What do you want to happen? Because one thing that we found with your dad was there's just no preparation, and
Yeah.
it
So
makes
you came up
it
with
really stressful.
you came up with this question, and I've been asking this to people. It's just how would you like your death to be handled, and what do you want it to mean to people that you leave behind? And yeah, to your point, when my dad died, it was just this. It was this thing where he never talked about it, right? So we
Yeah.
didn't know, there was no will, there was no resuscitation guidelines, there was no what to do with my body afterwards. It was like, okay, I'm gone, figure this out. I mean, side note, was a little bit stressful for our family, right? To have to deal with this and try to honor somebody's wishes and do it right. But at the end of the day, it's like, if they didn't care enough to do it for themselves, why
Yeah.
would you have to stress out to do it? But great question. How would you like your death to be handled, and what do you want it to mean to people?
So I'm like, well, so as a deep nature lover for my whole life, we actually stumbled upon a really cool business that is taking off through this podcast, which we discovered Terramation,
Yes.
which is a growing industry of basically turning bodies back to soil. And because you can't just randomly bury a body anywhere, but you can put soil anywhere. And not, it's not ashes, which is blowing away with the wind. You're actually giving back to the earth in a really beautiful, nurturing way. And you can plant stuff in it, and you can split it into different areas. You can really do some very meaningful things with the soil. And it's a extremely eco-friendly way of dealing with your body, because one of the really major modern problems in the world is the quality of topsoil. So our food is very kind of lacking in nutrients because topsoil is in decline, whereas we have an inbuilt biological system on this planet that dead stuff's meant to turn into soil. But with our bodies, we have got into this habit where, through a lot of religion and religious practices in the West, certainly, that mean the body is not decomposing and it's not being fed back to Mother Nature.
It's being pumped full of formaldehyde, or it's being put in a box,
Yes.
which leaves a very it leaves a footprint, right? So
Yeah.
it's not very efficient, and it's also just not very comforting as a ritual, is it?
No, and it's the fear of decomposition. That
Yeah.
the whole thing is because the people who are left alive can't handle the thought of the body being eaten by worms. So you do everything that you can to try and protect it and try and make it last as long as possible. And of course, eventually, it's all going to turn into the same thing.
Was it you, or was it somebody that you knew that witnessed a sky burial?
Oh, it
What
was my
what
cousin
was the story?
Stephen.
Ah,
And I wrote a song about that too. And so a Tibetan sky burial, he got invited, which is really unusual for a white guy in Tibet to join. And they go up to this plateau in the mountains, and there's a guy in the community whose job it is to chop up the grandma with a machete at a distance, but still in front of the community. And then he retreats back to where everybody's standing. And as they go through their prayers and their thanks and their celebration of this elder, vultures come down and actually physically take pieces of their relative and fly off into the sky, which is just unbelievable.
unbelievable.
Seeing the body actually in front of your eyes return to nature. I love as well that you're done. There's
Yeah.
nothing there. There's no plot. There's no headstone. There's no site. Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's where they would take anyone in the community who died. So it was a ritualistic site. But
Right.
you're not holding on to physicality. You're dealing with death. You're letting it go, and it's gone. Do you have a pull to kind of visit,
A pool?
a pull in you to visit a grave site or a headstone or a
There is a certain nostalgia to that. I think there's a romantic sort of idea behind going to a grave site and kind of spending time with your loved one. I mean, I think that's comforting. But when you read, I was reading about talk about sky burials. I was reading in Madagascar, I think they actually, it's almost the opposite, where they hold on to the body, and every few months
Oh,
they unearth it, and then they parade it around, and they change the clothes, and they write the name different on the clothing, and so it's almost the opposite of where they're holding on as opposed to letting
yeah.
go. So it's fascinating, the different
Yes.
rituals that
It is.
cultures take on.
And I don't mean to sound judgmental, because everybody will deal with losing someone in their own way, and being able to visit somewhere can be
Yeah,
extremely comforting and helpful, and give you that place and that space to spend time with the memory of that person, the energy of that person.
yeah.
I would just personally love to do that in a forest rather than in a graveyard.
At the end of the day, as long as there's some sort of ritual, there's some sort of
Yeah.
discussion, I think it's all good, the details of it. But when
Yeah.
you
I
avoid it
think talking
altogether,
about our own demise is a step towards being more open about it, because quite a lot of people, if you mention it, they're like, oh, I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it. It's like,
so
well,
you want
it's
you want
gonna happen.
an earth burial, earth funeral,
Yes,
termation,
soil, please.
soil, back to the soil, and
Yes.
you want your friends to cry for days, right? And
Oh,
sit
I
shiver
just
for
want
you.
them sobbing,
Yeah.
absolutely just apoplectic, can't stand up. No, I think I would like a very nature based experience of bringing people together, and probably storytelling. That's I think one of the most beautiful aspects of someone passing, is the kind of um the memories and the storytelling, your favorite memories, and your most important memories of that person and what they've done for you. There's a song I wrote after my dad died called Feel It All, which was also the last song that I played for your dad last time I saw him. And but there's a line in that that says, do you know what you've done for me? You've made my branches grow, now they can play with the wind, and they can carry the snow. So it's just that acknowledgement of what that person has gifted you during their life. The other thing I find really, really interesting in my own um, understanding of death is acceptance that this person, that was their time. Tom had 80 years. My dad had 72. Someone's baby had a week. You just can't fight the truth of it, that
Yeah.
that's the amount of time that soul has on earth. And you either let it destroy you and say that it's unfair, or you have to try and think, what did that soul gift me in that time that they were given, and the time they were allotted. And usually it's a huge amount, no matter how long. But I always like to say, when people say, what do you think about death, I always like to say, I think it's going to be much more fun than we think.
You think? What do you think is going to happen?
I think we don't know, but I do believe something is.
Hmm.
I like to believe that we return to, we're a little drop that's been taken out the ocean, living as a little raindrop during our life, and then at the end of it, we return to that ocean. And I think I have a confidence that the return to that ocean is probably pretty fantastic.